When Max Havelaar was published in 1860, it caused a sensation in Holland, unlike anything the country had ever experienced. Eduard Douwes Dekker, a former colonial administrator in Java, wrote it under the pseudonym Multatuli, and exposed the systematic extortion and tyranny of the Dutch East India Company so thoroughly that the government itself could never refute a single fact. At Haberdash Books, we find the masterpieces history tried to bury. This novel shocked an empire, influenced global abolitionism, and then quietly disappeared from English consciousness, buried under a century of colonial silence. Hit subscribe, and YouTube will bring you a new forgotten classic every single day. You will never run out of things to read.
(1868). Preface. Max Havelaar was published a few years ago and caused such a sensation in Holland as was never before experienced in that country. The author wrote it under the pseudonym of Multatuli, but his real name, Eduard Douwes Dekker, formerly assistant resident of the Dutch government in Java, at once became known. Full of fire and overflowing with enthusiasm, the author presented it to his countrymen in the form of a novel. A book wherein he made them acquainted with the incredible extortions and tyranny of which the natives of the Dutch Indies, that magnificent empire of insolence, which winds about the equator like a garland of emeralds, are the victims, and how he tried in vain, while still in the service of the government, to put an end to the cruel oppressions that happen every day in those countries. Though some considered his book to be merely an interesting and captivating novel, the author maintained that it contained nothing but facts. He boldly asked the Dutch government to prove the substance of his book to be false, but its truth has never been disputed. At the International Congress for the Promotion of Social Sciences at Amsterdam, in 1863, he challenged his countrymen to refute him, but there was no champion to accept the challenge. In short, Mr. Douwes Dekker, who had been a functionary in the service of the Dutch government for the space of 17 years, rather understated than overstated the truth. Not a single fact was ever contested in Holland, and he is still ready to prove his statements. One in the Dutch Parliament, nobody answered a single word, but Mr. Van Twist, ex-Governor-General of the Dutch Indies, who, on being appealed to by the Baron van Havelaar, said that he could perhaps refute Max Havelaar, but that it was not his interest to do so. The book proves that what was formerly written in Uncle Tom's Cabin of the cruelties perpetrated upon the slaves in America is nothing in comparison to what happens every day in the Dutch Indies. Max Havelaar is the name under which the author chooses to describe his experiences in the East. In the first chapters of the book, he has just returned from India, and he meets an old school companion, at that time a coffee broker, a Mr. Dristable. This Mr. Dristable is very rich, and the author being just then very poor, the latter asks his old schoolfellow to be security for the publishing of his book. At first Mr. Dristable will not hear of this, but afterwards, when he perceives that it will be of some advantage to himself, he consents. Dristable is a very characteristic person, knowing nothing beyond his trade, a great egotist, and is represented by the author with true wit and humor, in order to show the extreme contrast between himself and some of his countrymen, whom he may perhaps have met with since his return from Java. At that time, the author wears a plaid or shawl, and Mr. Dristable therefore speaks always of him as Mr. Shawman. A few months after the publication of Max Havelaar, one of the most eminent members of the Dutch Parliament avowed that this book had struck the whole country with horror. In vain, the Dutch tried to make a party question of it. The author openly declared that he belonged neither to the Liberal nor to the Conservative Party, but that he placed himself under the banner of right, equity, and humanity. As soon, however, as he professed to be a mere friend of mankind, without bias to any political party, the official world avoided even to pronounce his name, and affected to have forgotten the man whose conduct had before been considered as a reproof, and whose influence menaced danger to people in place. Instead of accepting the challenge, It seemed more worthy to fight the battle out with the vile weapons of abuse and slander. Of course, the reader will not regard Mr. Dristable's nonsensical and hypocritical observations as the sentiments of our author. It is precisely Multatuli's intention to make Dristable odious, and his philosophy absurd, though sometimes he speaks truth and common sense, for he is a type of a part of the Dutch nation. So much for the tendency of the book. Need I say that it will do honor to the literature of any language, and that it may be read as well for profit as for amusement? But Max Havelaar is immortal, not because of literary art or talent, but because of the cause he advocates. I think that everyone who admires Harriet Beecher Stowe's immortal pleading ought likewise to read Multatuli's accusation. I compare Max Havelaar to Uncle Tom's Cabin, but I do not compare Multatuli, the champion and the martyr of humanity and justice, to Mrs. Stowe. For I am not aware that that lady, with all her merits, has sacrificed future fortune and all that makes life agreeable for a principle, for right and equity, as has been done by Eduard Douwes Dekker. Max Havelaar bears evidence of having been written by a genius of that order, which only appears at long intervals in the world's history. His mind embraces in its intellectual compass all mankind, regardless of race or caste. By the diffusion of this book, a bond will be formed embracing all lovers of genius and justice throughout the world. It was the intention of the author to have had his work translated into all the European languages. Unfortunately, he unwittingly disposed of the property of his own book, and if it had not thus been legally withheld from the people of Holland, it is probable that I should not have been its translator. But I have been constrained to make known as widely as possible the sad truth regarding the maladministration of laws in themselves good by the Dutch government in her Indian dependencies. To the British nation, the facts will be new, as the books published in England on Dutch India are few in number, superficial in character, and give no idea of the condition of the native population. I cannot judge of English politics or about British India, but however perfect British rule may be, it cannot be so perfect that it has nothing more to learn. To Everdeen Hubert, Baroness Wainbergen. J.I. souvent entendu plaindre les femmes de paillet, et sans doute, pour tenir dienement dans la vie si difficile emploi, aucune qualité en est de trop. Le plus rare ensemble de mérites en est que le strict nécessaire, et ni suffit même pas taugers au commune benheur. Voir sans cesse la muse entiers dans vos plus familiars intressions. Reculier dans ses bras et soigner si paillet, qui est votre mari. Quand il vous revient muetri, par les déceptions de sa tâche. Ou bien le voir s'envoler à la poursuite de sa chimère. Voilà l'ordinaire de l'existence pour une femme de paillet. Oui, mais aussi il y le chapitre des compensations, el hura des lauriers quilligagnes à la sueur de son gaini, et quil dépose piusment aux pieds de la femme légitimement aimée, aux genoux de l'antigone qui sert de guide, en si monde à cet aveugle errant. Car, ni vous y trompez pas. Presque tous les petits fils de Homer sont plus, au moins aveugles à leur façon. Ils voyant si que nous n'y voyons pas. Leurs regards pénétrant plus haut et plus au fond que les noters. Mais ils n'y savent pas voir droit devant eu leur petit bonhomme de chemin, et ils serient capables de trébucher et de s'y casser le nez sur le moindre caillou, et s'il leur fallait chemineur sans saution, dans ces valets de prose ou demure la vie. Henry de Pine. Officer. My lord, this is the man who murdered Betsy. Judge, he must hang for it. How did he do it? Officer. He cut up her body in little pieces and salted them. Judge, he is a great criminal, he must hang for it. Lothario. My lord, I did not murder Betsy, I fed and clothed and cherished her. I can call witnesses who will prove me to be a good man and no murderer. Judge, you must hang. You blacken your crime by your self-sufficiency. It ill becomes one who is accused of anything to set up for a good man. Lothario. But my lord. There are witnesses to prove it, and as I am now accused of murder. Judge, you must hang for it. You cut up Betsy, you salted the pieces, and you are satisfied with your conduct. 3 capital counts. Who are you, my good woman? Woman, I am Betsy. Lothario, thank God, you see, my lord, that I did not murder her. Judge, Humph, I what? What about the salting? Betsy. No, my lord, he did not salt me. On the contrary, he did many things for me. He is a worthy man. Lothario. You hear, my lord, she says I am an honest man. Judge, Humph. The 3rd count remains. Officer, remove the prisoner, he must hang for it. He is guilty of self-conceit. Unpublished play. Chapter I am a coffee broker, and live at number 37 Laurier Canal, Amsterdam. I am not accustomed to write novels or works of that kind. Therefore, it took me a long time before I could resolve to order a few extra quires of paper and begin this book, which you, dear reader, have just taken in hand, and which you must finish, whether you are a coffee broker or anything else. Not only that I never wrote anything that resembled a novel, but I even do not like to read such things, because I am a man of business. For many years I have asked myself, what is the use of such works? And I am astonished at the impudence with which many a poet or novelist dares to tell you stories which never happened, and often never could have happened at all. If I in my position, I am a coffee broker and live at number 37 Laurier Canal, made a statement to a principal, that is, a person who sells coffee, in which I related only a small part of the lies which form the greater part of poems and novels, he would immediately cease to employ me, and go over to Busselink and Waterman, who are likewise coffee brokers. But you need not know their address. Therefore I take good care not to write any novels, nor to advance any false statements. I have always remarked that persons who do so are often badly off. I am 43 years of age, I have visited the exchange for the last 20 years, and therefore I can come forward whenever you are in want of a person of experience. How many firms do I know which have been utterly ruined? And generally, when looking for the causes of their failure, it appeared to me that they must be attributed to the wrong direction, which most of them followed in the beginning. My maxims are and will always be truth and common sense, making, of course, an exception with regard to the Holy Scriptures. The origin of this fault may be traced to our children's poet, Van Alphen, too, in his very first line, about dear little babies. What the deuce could make that old gentleman declare himself to be an adorer of my little sister Gertrude, who had weak eyes, or of my brother Gerard, who always played with his nose? And yet, he says, that he sang those poems inspired by love. I often thought when a child, my dear fellow, I should like to meet you once, and if you refused me the marbles which I should ask you for, or the initials of my name in chocolate, my name is Batavis, then I should believe you.
Max Havelaar arrived in Holland in 1860 as a thunderbolt. It caused, as the preface states, a sensation never before experienced in that country. Multatuli's real identity, Eduard Douwes Dekker, a 17-year veteran of the Dutch colonial service in Java, became known almost immediately. The book was hailed as a masterwork of witness and moral outrage. At the 1863 International Congress for the Promotion of Social Sciences in Amsterdam, Dekker publicly challenged anyone to refute a single fact in his account of colonial atrocities. No one answered. The Dutch Parliament remained silent. Even the ex-Governor-General Van Twist admitted the book was truthful, but claimed it wasn't in his interest to defend the system. Yet within decades, Max Havelaar vanished from the English-speaking world, not because it was weak, but because it was unbearably true. Colonial powers had no interest in keeping alive a novel that compared Dutch rule in the Indies to American slavery and found the Dutch guilty of worse. It fell out of print, untranslated, unread. What remains is a work of extraordinary moral clarity, a novel that proved facts could burn hotter than fiction. If you've ever loved the moral clarity of Uncle Tom's Cabin, the unflinching colonial critique of Heart of Darkness, or the documentary power of journalism told as fiction, then Multatuli's Max Havelaar is exactly what you've been looking for. The complete audiobook is free at haberdashbooks.com. Links are in the description. Chapter 1 has just ended. You've heard the opening voice of a man who watched an empire's corruption from the inside, and decided the truth was more important than his career. The complete audiobook is waiting at haberdashbooks.com. Subscribe and tomorrow's forgotten classic will find you.